Sonic, the heart of your system.
I'm the Audificate Guru. When I first saw the Thermaltake Level 20 HT at Computex this year, I did not appreciate quite how unusual it is. At first glance, it looks like a cut-down version of their ginormous Tower 900, a case I have not reviewed. A case that stands 750mm tall. I mean, it's like a vending machine. It's just enormous. It's got like a display down the bottom. So this would be like a section of that case. But this case also, the HT, also strikes me as being reminiscent of the XT, a case I have looked at quite recently, which is essentially just a cube with glass on all sides. But it's not like the XT. It's actually quite different when you get into it. The features that make the HT stand apart from pretty much any other Thermaltake I can think of, and most cases on the market, are that the intake is at the bottom of the case, the exhaust is at the top. There are two exhaust fans installed in the roof of the case. It's also a dual chamber design, so this is where you put your goodies you want to show off and you hide the gubbins around the back. So the HT is slightly reminiscent of a few cases we've seen from Corsair, Silverstone and Cooler Master, but this orientation, this layout is quite unusual, and being Thermaltake, of course, there's glass. There's an awful lot of glass. Before I pull off the panels, let's just go over the front I/O, which is split on both sides. This side is all the USB, so one Type-C, that's USB 3.1 Gen 2. We've got a couple of USB 2s and a couple of USB 3.0s as used to be, or 3.1 Gen 1s as they are now. On this side we've got power button, reset button and headset jacks. So to remove the various panels, we press on this button here, and the front glass comes out. Rotate this catch, open the door, lift it away. Same on the other side. Spin the case around so you can see the back. 4 thumb screws, which are kind of semi-captive, so they sort of hang in the holes in the panel. That panel then pulls out. The top glass is retained with 2 pop pins, so simply push and it releases. The fans here, you will note, are under the glass. The only ventilation on the top are these strips at the side. These fans are attempting to push air through glass. And there we have the exposed chassis, and here we have the other half of the front I/O panel. In the main compartment we have the intake section here, and there is a radiator rack, can accommodate up to 360mm. I've got this whacking great big Thermaltake CL360 Plus. It's 64mm in thickness, and of course it's compatible with 3 120mm fans, which could either go in push or pull, or push-pull quite frankly. So air drawn in there, going up, that makes perfect sense. Loads of grommets for cables. Humorously, this is an RGB radiator. I mean, you've got a stick-on panel of RGB and a control box, or you can park the RGB and just have this great big copper radiator. These are pump mounts. So we take our Pacific, it's only a 200mm I think res on this one. So you take your Pacific D5, plonk it on there, job done. Here we have the matching mounts, so you could have 2 res pumps, and here we have an SSD mount. Common sense says that's going to be if you've got a load of RGB. Okay, then your motherboard goes here. The thing is, the I/O panel goes up. The I/O shield is here. Your graphics card goes vertically in this direction. When we say graphics card vertically, normally we mean it's like that. In this instance, it's hanging up this way, and then your graphics outputs are on the top. Here we have the second radiator rack, either 360 or 280. You can of course install fans instead of a radiator should you choose. The curious thing here is the side panel going on the hinges, as you saw earlier. It's glass. How the air is supposed to get to the radiator, I don't know, unless it's being drawn up from the bottom. So that's going to be interesting to see thermally. And because we've got a depth of, yay, If I put this super thick radiator in the rack, it sticks out proud. So a radiator on that rack of this kind of thickness will need to go in board like so. That actually makes more sense because it's now above this ventilated section here. So if, I mean, the fans there, I'm gonna have to see how that one goes really. That's not, doesn't look natural, if you know what I mean. I've got a ToughPower ARGB 850 watt PF1 model. That is gonna hang here. So power supply hanging vertically, cables then can go through these endless grommets, that's all fine. And here we have drive caddy, so we've got the single SSD mount around the other side. Here we have 2.5, 3.5 inch drive caddies, so we can mount either 5 SSDs in total or some laptop drives, or we can go for 1 SSD and 4 full-size hard drives, and of course you can have M.2 SSDs. It's an interesting looking chassis. There's loads of space inside. Mounting the hardware in this side along with all the cooling, that should be straightforward enough. Hiding away the power supply and the cables, that makes sense to me. The airflow, that's looking a little bit peculiar. The idea of having a rad on this side trying to suck air through a glass panel, and on the top trying to exhaust through a glass top, that obviously presents a big question. Nonetheless, we have to press on, we have to see how it works out in the real world. It was fairly clear from the first word that this was going to be a peculiar case to build in, because the motherboard is flipped and the air comes in the bottom and goes out to the top and so on and so forth. Before I get into the details, let's have a quick talk about the spec of the build that I've gone for. The processor is an Intel Core i9-9900K, stock speed 4.7 GHz. Once I've done the initial thermal testing, I gave it an overclock to 4.9 GHz all cores. Motherboard, Asus ROG Maximus 11 formula that I reviewed quite recently. We've got 16 GB of G.Skill TridentZ Royal DDR4 3200 MHz. The graphics card is an Asus ROG Strix Gaming Vega 64, that's the OC version. It's wearing an EK block, as you can see. Power supply, Thermaltake ToughPower PF1 ARGB, and the SSD is an M.2, which is out of sight. It's a 1TB Intel 760p. Because I'm using the M.2 SSD, I removed the drive caddies from the back compartment because I simply don't need them, and that's helped cable management. Those caddies actually take up quite a lot of space, even in such an enormous case. Taking them out just makes life easier. In terms of the cooling, we've got a custom loop on both CPU and GPU, as you can see. The Thermaltake Pacific PR15 D5 pump reservoir unit is actually a 150mm unit. In this chassis, it looks absolutely minuscule. This could accommodate at least a 250 or more, and really dual pump reservoirs, so you have separate loops for CPU and GPU, would make a lot of sense. The CPU block is a Thermaltake W4. I purloined from one of the Thermaltake kits I have lying around. Although it is an RGB model, I'm not using the rest of the RGB hardware from that same kit, and hence I don't actually have an RGB connection that is suitable for the plug on that block. I'll come back to RGB in just a moment. The graphics block is an EK Radeon Vega Strix RGB, and you can see the RGB is working. That's part of the reason I've gone for this view at the moment, so you can see the RGB in the graphics card. Because of the unusual orientation, it looks particularly good from the side. Really strange to say those words. Radiators. We've got a pair of Thermaltake CL360 Pluses. They are huge units. They've done really good work in this build. On top of those, we've got 6 Thermaltake Ring Duo 12 fans, which is giving you so much of the RGB light show. The fittings are Alphacool 1016mm, and we've got some 1016 soft tube. Coolant Thermaltake P1000 white. From the front, you can see I've got the radiator in the main compartment upside down. That's entirely a mistake on my part. The logo's the wrong way up. This rad has multiple inlet outlets, so I could have easily flipped it if I'd thought about it, but didn't. The fans on it, however, they have to be the wrong way up because, of course, the air is coming from the bottom of the case and going up. I can either have them in pull, as I have, in which case you can see the RGB show, which works very well, or I can have them on under the rad in push, which means you don't see the fact they're the wrong way round aesthetically, but of course they'd work equally well. So I've gone the way I have. In terms of the RGB, we've got the 6 Thermaltake fans controlled by Thermaltake's own software suite, which works very nicely. I've got RGB in the graphics card, which is hooked up to the Asus Aura on the motherboard, and similarly with the G.Skill memory, so that's all Aura. The same is true of the power supply. It has an ARGB header, so it hooks up to the motherboard, so that is also controlled by the Asus software. So we've got 2 separate systems going on. We've got the fans on the Thermaltakes, everything else is on Asus. It works perfectly well, but of course if you want perfect synchronization, that might not be entirely satisfactory to you. Before I talk about thermals, let's just cover the basics, the fundamentals of the layout of this case. Because it is an updraft design, it means that the rear I/O is on the top, in this instance under glass. It follows that my graphics outputs have to come under the glass, out the side, and connect to monitors, and the same is true of anything else you're connecting to your rear I/O, speakers or whatever. Clearly you can connect to those front I/O connections, in which case you'll have cables trailing down the sides of your PC. Not ideal. It would, I think, be better if Thermaltake had some sort of pass-through thing going on, so there was a panel, you know, on the bottom around the front or some such. As things stand, that is just not satisfactory. When the case is in isolation, it looks fine. Start plugging things in, it's a different story. In a similar way, with everything being on show behind the glass, some of these fans have stickers in the center on the central hub that are clearly off center. As a result, it looks like the fan is wobbling. Again, aesthetically, it's an issue. The fans themselves are fine, but it doesn't quite look right, and that's the snag. Anything that doesn't quite look right, such as the wiring from the pump reservoir, looks wrong. And there is a huge amount of scope for this case and the build to look wrong. You need to put a lot of effort in to make it look even tolerable. You also need to use a lot of hardware in your build. I've gone for quite a lot of hardware, maybe I haven't gone for enough. Pump reservoir, that's certainly an issue. It needs to be bigger, ideally dual reservoirs, maybe even triple reservoirs. But as things stand, 1 pump res at the front in glorious isolation looks a little bit peculiar. But the rest of the system I think looks okay. So, thermals. I wondered when I first looked at this case if it would be bad, actually. And the answer is it isn't. It isn't bad. So here's what I did. I've got the Vega 64 graphics card running at stock settings, but it is an OC model. I've got my 9900K processor, so default speed there 4.7 gigahertz all cores. I ran stress tests on those parts and the temperatures were where I expected them to be. That is with the CPU up at 76 degrees and the GPU at 38 degrees. I then thought, well, 4.7 gigahertz isn't much of a test, but my particular processor does not overclock all that well, as I established when I reviewed this very motherboard quite recently. So I went for a 4.9 gigahertz overclock, which is relatively tame. That pushed the processor temp up to 85 degrees, made no difference to the graphics card temp 39, because obviously the coolant's very slightly warmer. That's with the fans running at 1500 RPM, and the fans are quite clearly audible in this case at 1500 because of course there's no noise deadening material whatsoever. Once I'd run the PC with the CPU overclocked to 4.9, I then removed the top glass because that glass looks wrong. The fans are behind the glass. How can it possibly work? It did indeed help CPU temperatures. At 4.9 gigahertz, it dropped from 85 degrees to 81 degrees. Much less than I expected. That's a trivial difference. That says to me that Thermaltake has got the design fundamentally correct. I then put the top back in place and removed the side panel, which is over the side radiator, where again the fans appear to be sucking air through solid glass. That can't work, can it? Same story actually. The CPU temperature again, 81 degrees. I have to say that despite appearances, this chassis has actually been well laid out. It works. So thumbs up to Thermaltake on that score. It's quite clear in this build, the limitation is my 9900K processor rather than anything else in the system. And we come to the burning question, would I buy the Thermaltake Level 20 HT? And the short answer is I would not. Not because it's particularly expensive, although it is fairly expensive. This black version is 190 or 195 pounds, the Snow White version 200, 205. That strikes me as being rather a lot when you consider you get 2 fans installed and they are regular non-RGB models. I think the case should be cheaper, but whether it's £200 or 160 is a detail, because my issue with it is just so large. I don't want a case that's just vast with glass on all sides and then you have to plug in the cables at the top. But that's obviously fundamental to nature. If you want a case like this, this is actually a surprisingly good case. I expected to dislike the HT, if I'm entirely frank, and I've come out with a grudging respect. It's just not for me. So yep, if you choose to buy it, I'm not going to hold it against you. But personally, I want something smaller for my own personal PC. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, click the bell button, subscribe, we'll let you know about new videos as they become available. I'm Neil Warder for Kit Guru. This is the mighty Thermaltake Level 20 HT